I think when you look at the quote from Aristotle and Gandhi and Terence, let me start with Aristotle. I think that what Aristotle is trying to tell us actually is still very valid for us despite the pandemic, because it's pointing out that human beings are what he called in Greek zone politikon, meaning human beings are by nature social and by nature they are political, because we are equipped with speech and we do action, and this is where we can make each other understand about freedom, about justice, even about a pandemic, I would say. uh, so I don't think that the pandemic has modified the Aristotelian truth about the fact that human beings um, or cannot survive in nature. I mean, they only survive in a society and in a city state, as he used to say, or let's say in a social and political context. And I don't think that the pandemic has necessarily changed this natural need that we have, despite the social distancing. This natural need that Aristotle is talking about, this natural need that Gandhi is talking about when he says that we are undivided humanity, and Terence talks about this natural need of humans to seek friendship, civic friendship, companionship of the others, to seek love, to cultivate love and friendship. We still do it through the internet. I mean, it means that we need, like we're talking to each other, and we're having this festival. This means that this communication is a part of this social and political being that Aristotle is talking about, and it's important. So I think that Aristotle somehow he knew very well that the establishment of an institution or let's say political society is not necessarily like a plant growing to maturity out of a seed. Human beings are much more complicated people, and it's politics and social life is not necessarily about natural management of human society. It's an art of organizing the affairs of the community, which is a little bit more complicated than just doing things naturally. Uh, and this is where Gandhi comes, and the quote that he says, we are undivided, we are a family, because every human society is a collective survival enterprise. And when I talk about survival enterprise, I'm thinking about the pandemic, because the question of survival is also very, very important. So here again, we go back to this idea that the classics knew very well, that citizens have or human beings, they have a common purpose. They try to find a common purpose. They have common responsibility to survive, first of all, to provide security and sustainability for the future generations. So all these, I think, are very, very important. And I don't think that the cycle of human life has necessarily changed with the pandemic. We have had pandemics like the plague, the Black Plague in the Middle Ages, or Justinian plague in the past. Maybe it was not global as COVID-19, because today we have mass communication and we have the internet and we can learn about each other. Now, I want to point out one thing which is very, very important, and it goes back again to the classics. We have this consciousness about our fragility. And I think that this idea of fragility is very important, because we discovered through the pandemic that ontologically and biologically we are fragile and we are frail. So we need to go back and think about that. But what does it tell us? Which again, these quotes actually are cultivating, and these quotes are showing us, is that the fragility takes us to interconnectedness again. The idea that we need each other, the idea that there is a necessity for a kind of a companionship at the level of all human beings at the global level. And if we are confronted with a problem like the pandemic, we need to solve it all together. This, I think, and it's an idea that the classics knew very well. I mean, we're talking about, of course, Aristotle, but if we come to 20th century and somebody like Gandhi, he knew it also very well, because when he's talking about his nonviolence, he's also talking about a form of solidarity and interconnectedness. And God knows that the thing that we need most with the COVID-19 pandemic is solidarity. I mean, this strategy of having solidarity and we understanding each other, I think is very, very important, because there is a shared suffering here. And so we have to go back and read our classics again. I think if we go back to the quote by Montaigne also, what he is trying to point out is that I and the other are different, but we need to be aware of each other's otherness. And this is actually one of the subjects that goes really to my heart, because I think that we need to have this, be aware of the otherness of the other. What I mean by the otherness of the other is actually is the fact that, and it's not only has to do with the pandemic, it has to do also with the climate change and all the problems and global challenges that we have, is that we all suffer together. Life is also about suffering, but life is also about sharing. So the otherness of the other is actually, I would say, a horizon which is always there for us, and it pushes us to understand as an emergency that we are not alone on the planet. When we're talking about the pandemic, we're talking about the human beings, and the otherness of the other is another human being. But if we enlarge this question, because I think the pandemic, what it's showing us is that we will have other global challenges coming in 21st century, and maybe in the next century, which are going to be worse than COVID-19. I think the climate change problem is actually is going to be worse. So we need to be very careful about the fact that we have to get out of our egoism and very egoistic, I would say, politics and policy making that we have in different parts of the world. The fact that we are consumers and we are not paying attention to the plants and animals. But at the same time, with the pandemic, it's the problem of shared suffering. I would call it the shared suffering. I talked already about the fragility of human beings, but in addition to that, is the fact that the pandemic, we know, is a global catastrophe. It's not just an individual catastrophe. It's not only happening in my home, in my country, in my village. It's something that I have to share with the others. And here, I think that what is important is that we need to try to understand the fragility of the other also, because we know that we might die. We know that we die actually at the end, but we also know that the other also dies. And so life and death, I would say, are no more taken for given, but they are taken as tasks of the mind. So we need to come back, or to go back to the two key concepts of for human life and human ontology, which is the death and life. I think what these emergencies like the pandemic, they show us is that we have to go back and redefine what we mean by death. We have to redefine by what does it mean by life or art of living. Do we really have an art of living, an art of dying? In a pandemic, there is no art of dying, because you see that the tragic side of it is that human beings die anonymously. You don't know who are these hundreds of thousands of people who have died around the world. Well, you don't know who are these who, if they are not from your family. And even if they are from your family, again, is you get out of this tradition of art of dying, which used to be that you can take people to the cemetery or you can have mourning, and this it has changed all our approach to life and death. So I think that here again, the point that Montaigne and others are making about the other or the otherness becomes very, very important, because without this, without paying attention to the otherness of the other, we cannot really bring ethics into, or the ethical into our everyday management of life and management of the society. So I would certainly say that we need this awareness of the otherness of the other, especially in times like the pandemic of COVID-19. When I think that when we look at the quote by Gandhi, which is a very essential quote because it has been taken later on by somebody like Martin Luther King Jr. in America in his civil rights movement, it shows us that somebody like Gandhi, in the same way as Martin Luther King or Mandela or Dalai Lama and others, they were not only political activists, but they were also thinking about this aspect of ethics and the ethical in human lives. That's why Gandhi is talking about the sins of humanity or the social ills. I'm not sure up to what point the pandemic has made humanity aware of the social sins that Gandhi is talking about. I'm not sure up to what point we have understood our social ills, because if tomorrow we have a vaccine and people around the world they are vaccinated, they go back again to some of these social sins that Gandhi is talking about. They will go certainly back. One of the points that Gandhi always made, and he already did it in 1909 when he wrote Hind Swaraj, his famous pamphlet, under the influence of Tolstoy, is that we are living in a very materialistic, in a very utilitarian world, and we are not paying attention enough to morality and ethics. And I think that in today's world, if we take one of the social sins that Gandhi is talking about, there is an obsession with success. Even with the pandemic, there is an obsession with success, and I think this obsession that human beings have in 21st century with success, and Donald Trump is actually one of the examples of this obsession with success, that you have to succeed despite the tragedy of other human beings. I think that one of the greatest sins of all is to think and to act as if life is only about success. And Gandhi was very much aware of that. That's why he brought in, through his nonviolence, he brought also an economic and social thinking, which was that we need to understand the others, we need to help out the others, we need to uplift. He has this word which is called sarvodaya, which means uplift of the people, of the oppressed. So we need really, with the pandemic, I think that we need to have this awareness of the oppressed. We need to have this awareness of poor people, of those who are dying in Syria, those who are dying in, the boat people who just try to come to Europe and they die in the sea, these children. Uh, and I think life is not, I mean, going back to Gandhi that I have worked with for something like 30 years of my life. Life is not about being successful. It's not it's about being in peace with oneself and with the world. And that's, I think, the message of Gandhi when he's talking about social ills that we need to think about. Uh, it's not about accumulation of capital. It's not about accumulation of money. It's not about egoism. It's not. It's about solidarity and empathy. Things that we need mostly in today's world. So in addition to that, one of the first social sins that Gandhi's and political sins that Gandhi is talking about is politics without ethics. And this, I think, is one of the evils of today's world, if I can call it, because you have next to an irresponsible citizenry around the world who are losing, especially in European democracies or in North America, who are using their democratic passion, and they are being less and less present in the public space and more privatized. I think that one of the points that Gandhi is making, and we need to go back and read him, is that we need to be enlightened, aware, and conscious about our actions. We need to understand that if we want to have democracies, democracies are fragile also. They can be destroyed. What the pandemic showed us is that some democracies can turn into, or liberal countries can turn into authoritarian regimes, and that's very, very dangerous. We saw it in many countries like that, where you have emergencies, you have new laws. You look at Hungary, for example, with Orban. This is a good example in Europe of a country which is turning towards more and more populist and authoritarian regimes. So Gandhi is actually guiding us to re-evaluate our action as citizens in relation with our regimes and with democratic regimes and with politics in general, how we want to organize our society despite the pandemic, or let's say with pandemic or after pandemic. So more or less, I think that going back and reading Gandhi, we should have this understanding of the fact that happiness is not necessarily success. Life is not necessarily interesting without bringing ethics into life, without thinking about others, without knowing how we are organizing our society. And more or less, I invite people really to take Gandhi seriously, because when he says, be the change that you want to see in the world, he's talking about self-transformation. And self-transformation is one of the emergencies that we need in this world, because if there is one thing that the pandemic is trying to help us to understand, is that we need to self-transform ourselves. This is really a good time for humanity to take things in its hands and try to remanage, I would say, and reorganize itself politically and philosophically. Uh, and when we talk about I mean, key concepts that we have become problems now and nowadays around the world, like tolerance and freedom. Um, I think that what Kant and reading a Kant has always brought me and made me conscious about is the idea of maturity. This is very, very important. That's why in the quotes that you have in front of your eyes, you have the idea of enlightenment. You know, when Kant is talking about the enlightenment, he's not only talking about an epoch, he's not only talking about a century of people like Voltaire and Rousseau and others. He's also referring to this idea of maturity. And I think this is very, very important, because actually what Kant is saying is that enlightenment is human beings' emergence from its self-incurred minority, infantilism. So this is one of the problems that we have in today's world. I mean, not only in Europe and United States, but also in Middle East and elsewhere. We can understand it from the rise of populisms. We can understand it from the fact that, again, the democratic passion is going down, despite the fact that people are scared, they feel in danger, they come out on the streets, but there is a lot of violence, and they don't know how to solve the problems and to tolerate each other, how to define their freedom. So this question of self-incurred minority and infantilism of humanity is very, very important. How can human beings, how can humanity as an undivided family, as Gandhi said, how can humanity become more mature to understand a pandemic, to help each other, to understand the climate change, to try to solve its environmental question, to try to fight for its freedoms, and it's used to do it all through the 20th century. Now, let's take a look at where we are. We have our politics and our society dominated by party politics, by mass communication, mass media, social media. We have populist leaders all around the world. We have people like Modi, Erdogan, Orban, Donald Trump, just name it. I mean, the number of populist leaders that there are in Brazil, in Austria, uh, and we have a corporate mindset which are actually dominating our education in our universities everywhere and our everyday life, and even the pandemic is controlled by the with the vaccine, with the corporate mindset, I would say, because people they don't know where is the truth. So what is happening, which Kant is referring to, because it was already a problem at his time, but less of a global problem actually, is that how can we live with mediocrity? How can we live with this conformism and complacency that we see in everyday life right now? You can see it around the world how people are becoming more and more conformist when it comes to politics, and it comes to again to the problem of success. So what if, with the spirit of Kant, what can we do? What should we think about? And what is exactly the enlightenment that he's talking about and I'm thinking about? I think it's about moral and political autonomy. I mean, autonomy in the sense of we are the people, we are humans who make our own laws. Make our own institutions so we can transform our institutions. But we need to have this spirit of dissent and dissidence, which I think is very, very important. And I've been working on. Dissenting is actually not going and breaking, statues or breaking windows. It's about the questioning. And I think what Kant, as a great philosopher of modernity, is suggesting to us is to ask the right questions, but question the questions, because some of the questions which are put forward to you by politicians or by social media are not really questions. We need to evaluate the values with which we are living. We need to re-evaluate and re-question the question itself. We need actually to understand a concept like happiness, we like life, like politics, like sharing, and like solidarity. All these are very, very important. Now, why is this enlightenment so important? Because once again, uh, success and the way of life that we have chosen, especially from the early 21st century, but I would say late 20th century up to now, in the past 20, 30 years, has not made us more happy, and it's making people poorer around the world. So, and I think that we need to understand, we need to get out of our everyday lives in Europe. For example, since we're talking about Barcelona and a festival in Barcelona, uh, what the classics are showing us is that take a look out of your own context. Take look at a peasant in Latin America or in Africa or India. How do they live? How do they define happiness? How do they do it in the same way as a technological leader in Silicon Valley is doing it? No, certainly not. So we are actually missing the truth of those who are living in other parts of the planet. And I think that being enlightened, being aware, being conscious is actually being conscious about our global life, but not a global life which is dominated only by technology, only by mass communication, only by populist politics, but a global life which means a global in diversity. The problem, that the issue that Kant is referring to is that if we have to get out of our self-incurred minority, it means that we have also to pay attention again to this diversity that we have in the world. And this diversity is actually what can save us. Biodiversity, but also human diversity at the level of languages, at the level of the ethnics, at the level of cultures. And this is what we need most if we want to have a true enlightenment. Talking about tolerance, actually, I think is the key concept, especially during the pandemic, but also with everything which is going around in the world today. Uh, what Voltaire is referring to, and when what John Locke actually in his famous essay on tolerance is referring to, both of them actually, uh, is the fact it's not just that we take for granted the other person, but again, I think that tolerance, real tolerance, is the notion that I use, which is the otherness of the other, meaning that you are not just uh, othering the other, and you just not saying that the other exists, and I will, in the best of the best, I will not do anything with that person, but is taking interest in that person. It is taking interest in the cultural formation, I would say social formation or biological formation of that person. That person could be a Christian, could be a Jew, could be a Muslim. uh, and this is exactly what the spirit of tolerance is in today's world. If we see that there is so much violence because of the lack of tolerance and because of the lack of understanding of each other, and this is a point that both Locke and, of course, Voltaire, they understood in their times, is that we don't give ourselves the timing, the enough leisure and spare time to think about the otherness of the other. uh, for example, the problems that we see Europe is confronting, especially France in these past weeks, is the fact that because of the lack of dialogue which has existed between Muslims from the one hand and, let's say, people who believe in French secularism or in French republicanism, uh, and the fact that these are not questions which have been discussed openly, people sitting down and discussing them openly. It has been discussed by intellectuals, yes, but not necessarily by the people themselves. We have so much violence. uh, this is a fact that I think Gandhi and many others, they knew, and they tried to find solutions for it, because they knew that this is what Gandhi calls communal harmony. We have to, if we want to have tolerance, we have to be in search of harmony. It's not just that we say that we are for freedom of expression. It's not just that we say that we believe in tolerance. We have to practice tolerance. Practicing tolerance is not an easy fact. It's not an easy thing. Is actually opening up one's mind and one's heart and getting out of what I will call mental ghettos, because ghettos are not only physical ghettos, urban ghettos, there can be also mental. For example, when we stereotype others, and again, we are somehow prisoners of our mental ghettos, and we cannot get out of these mental ghettos. So we are living all around the world with these mental ghettos. Nationalism is a mental ghetto. I think populism is a mental ghetto. Ideologies of every sort are mental ghetto. Fanaticism actually is the worst of mental ghettos. And God knows that Voltaire and Locke, both of them, they understood very well how to fight fanaticism, and they knew that. Voltaire calls it uh, infamy, actually, because he understood the fact that this, if we don't go beyond this mental ghetto, there is no way that we can define tolerance as an active way of understanding the other. So how can we be tolerant? The only way in today's world to be tolerant, and maybe Pandemics sometimes might make us aware, because once again we're going to go back to this problem of fragility that I talked about in the beginning. If the pandemic shows us that we are fragile and we need each other, so we have to open up and go beyond our mental ghettos. So if we go beyond these mental ghettos, the problem which becomes the most important is that we need to have a revolution of values. We need to reevaluate our values. We need to re-educate ourselves. And here, the most important question is, of course, the question of education. Talking about education, I think that if we go back to this quote of Kant, which is very, very important, Kant says, sapere aude, have the courage to use your intelligence, have the courage to use your reasoning. Uh, I think this is the basis of education. And maybe I don't think that uh, it's in today's world we are really doing the questioning that we need, and we are using the in the Kantian way of looking at education and trying to solve the problem of our immaturity and infantilism. But you know, we need to be very frank with ourselves when we're talking about today's education, because if education is about self transformation of human beings, if education is about uh, being conscious about the possibility of speech and action in the public space, if education is about the art of learning, I'm not sure that if we stay again in our mental ghettos, and if we think that our ideologies and our mode of being or living is the best of the world, we can open up and we can learn from each other. Uh, Now, I want you to understand the fact that there is no way that we can learn without listening. And what is missing the most in today's world is that people don't listen to each other, especially in politics, they don't listen to each other. But also in the world today, if education has become a problem, if there is a crisis of education, is because we live in a world of noise. Where nobody listens. There are so much noises coming, technological noises, I would say. You have noises coming out of the TV, out of the radio, out of all these social media, out of populist politics, that we do not have the possibility of listening. And if we do, we cannot listen, we cannot learn, and therefore there is no education there if there is no learning. Uh, and I think this is very, very important. You know, I give to those who like classical music the example of one of the contemporary composers of 20th century, Olivier Messiaen, a French composer. He did an opera which was called Saint Francis. And I saw a documentary on him, was so much interesting about the art of listening. He went to the forest to listen to the birds and to put the songs of the birds into notes, into classical notes. This is fantastic. I mean, I'm making an opera just by listening to the biodiversity. Now, look what all the problems that we have. The problem of climate change also is because of lack of listening. We do not listen to our planet. We do not listen to each other. We do not listen to the art of politics. And of course, education, once again, is all about the art of listening. And we want to be successful and to lead before trying to learn and to listen. I've taught for a long period of time in different countries. I've taught in Canada. I'm teaching now in India. And I think that with the new generation of students, what is different is that they, first of all, they don't read their classics anymore. I'm sorry to say that. I try to invite them to think with the classics, and I tell them, if you don't know about the heritage that you have behind you, the education is not going to be accomplished. Education is also to look back about what you inherited and the whole heritage that you have. So this idea of they want to be successful and they want to become corporate lawyers and they want to become businesswomen or businessmen immediately without knowing anything about their classics, about how humanity lived for 50 centuries. And I think this is where education becomes so important and the art of listening becomes so important again. And this is where Kant is talking about, once again, about linking education with this art, with the enlightenment, and the fact that if we want to get out of our immaturity, we need to educate ourselves. And the best way to educate ourselves is, once again, to listen to the nature, is to listen to the societies, to listen to our history, to our past, and trying to involve it in our everyday lives and digest it somehow and try to get something new out of it. And for the time being, what this discussion about education brings me into mind is a poem by René Char, the famous, poet, French poet, who used to say that our inheritance is preceded with no testament. Now, where the education doesn't work, there is no testament actually, because people are actually getting educated in the void. They go to school, they go to university, but they don't know why they go on to the university and what they want. They just want a diploma and they want to graduate. But graduating per se doesn't make you educated. And that's the whole point. Um, uh, a peasant is much more educated than somebody just who goes and just gets a diploma from a university in Spain or in Italy or in United States. Why? Because the peasant at least knows how to, he has an education of the earth. He knows how to plant, seeds and to make wine out of the grapes. This is actually a form of education, natural education, which is so important. So, and the peasant knows how to listen to nature, and we need to know again how to listen to each other, but also listen to our classics. Since we're talking about the classics, in the past 10 years, in most of my books that I've written, I always bring in the classic because I think thinking with the classics is the best education that we can give ourselves in 21st century. I think that the ideal, if we want to transform everything into a government, we have to understand what we mean by governmentality. Uh, I think the ideal is not to have a Hobbesian state, for example, a fascist state, a populist state, a theological inquisition, like we are practicing it today in the world. We have countries like Saudi Arabia, Iran, we have the Taliban, we have the ISIS. This is not art of governing. This is art of killing, actually, or art of oppressing. We have to understand that government is not about oppression. I think that this is one of the bases of our political education in today's world, that um, democracy is not only about governmentality. Democracy is also the art of organizing a society, and it's art of being responsible and conscious about our life. So the ideal is to be in a public space, but how to govern this public space and not to privatize it as we're doing it in our social media. There is more and more temptation for people to stay at home and to get involved into politics through social media instead of going into the public space and doing it. So again, with the pandemic especially, we see that people are interconnected, but they are interconnected only technologically. They don't get to feel each other, to have this feeling of another human being. So I think that we need at this time strategies which take us back to this idea of governmentality, not in the sense of oppressing citizens, not in the sense of being lacking passion about politics or about public life, but on the contrary, having more and more sense of solidarity and sense of sharing, a space with others, so that we can somehow manage things in the ways that everybody can think about it. Now, to be very clear, the problems that we have at the level of governmentality, which populism is only one example of it, but we also have the fact that people are just voting or not even voting in some democracies, but they're not paying attention the rest of the time. As Rousseau used to say in Social Contract, that the people, the British, they go and vote every 4 years, and the rest of the time they stay at home and they're just not involved into the public space anymore. I think this is one of the facts that is one of the problems, one of the issues, the key issues that we have in today's world. Now, to summarize I think we need some strategies. We need to be very clear about where and how we are living. First of all, if I have to summarize everything that I said, I think that we are really living in new dark times. Especially at the time of the pandemic, we are living in new dark times. In the same feeling that at some points in the Middle Ages or at other epochs, centuries, humanity was living in dark times. How can we fight these dark times? When we're talking about citizenship, when we're talking about governments, how can we do that? First of all, I think we need to fight for democracy. And this is where the problem of governmentality becomes. We have to be aware that democracy is endangered by the monopoly of the ego. Democratic regimes might turn into authoritarian regimes. It's not because we have democracies or we have electoral regimes or we have liberal regimes that we can somehow sustain them. They can very easily be destroyed. Again, the question of fragility, which I talked about, saying that human beings are ontologically and biologically fragile, not just because they die, because also sometimes they are very frail. They don't know, like this pandemic, they don't know what to do. And it's the same thing with governments. Uh, a democratic government is a very fragile institution. It can be destroyed. It can be destroyed with new technologies. It can be destroyed with the lack of citizenship, or let's say irresponsible citizenry. It can be destroyed by lack of human freedom and human decision making. So the first point, which is so important in our strategies, is to fight for democracy. The second point is that if we want to fight for democracy, we cannot do it without democratic passion. We have to have a very deep understanding of what democratic life is, why we should be in the public space. It reminds me, since we're talking about classics and the defense of the classics, reminds me of the funeral oration of Pericles, in the War of Peloponnesian War, when he's defining the Athenians, and he says, Athenian, we are people who believe in kalos kagatos. We believe in beauty and we live in the good. But we think that if you are a citizen of Athens, you need to get involved in everyday things of Athens. And and those men who are not involved, we call them idiotes, idiots. Idiotes. He uses this word, idiotes, which we actually use today as idiots. Of course, look, people are less and less interested in democracy. So Are we turning into idiots, as Pericles is saying, idiotes? I think that there is a rise of mediocrity in our governments, in our art of governing, and in the relationship between the citizens and the government. So the second point was responsible citizenry and democratic passion. Now, there is a third point, which is also important when we're talking about relationship between citizens and governments, and that's I go back to this idea of empathy and the spirit of sharing. Democracies cannot survive without art of sharing and without sharing with other people around the world. They cannot close their eyes on refugees. They cannot close their eyes on the violence that is going around the world. They have to, since I believe in the Gandhian message, I think that peace and nonviolence are two important notions for the survival of democracies and for the management of the governments in today's world. So this spirit of sharing should be there, but this empathy about and understanding of the others, again, which we talked about, is very, very important. And without that, I think that democracies cannot survive. European democracies cannot survive without opening their hearts and minds to the problems of the others. What's going on in the Middle East, what's going on in Africa, why people want to come to Europe. You cannot just reject them. You have to understand and solve the issue. But today, populist regimes are just rejecting them. They're building walls. Building walls is not, I think, a very sane and a very intelligent way of approaching the problems of and challenges to democracy. And last but not least, what we did not talk about, and I would like to put it at the end of this interview, is that is truth seeking. You know, and here I go back to my Gandhi, I go back to Mandela, I go back to Martin Luther King, I go back to Henry David Thoreau, which you're seeing the quote, and somebody even like Václav Havel. You know, truth seeking against the lies which can destroy us. Governments which lie to citizens uh, are dangerous, and they are destroyers of our democracies. They are destroyers of the best way that human beings can govern each other, and they can govern themselves. So we need to live in truth, and we need to fight against lies as they are expanded in the social media. And we need to have this passion for truth, which the classics once again had, and they were actually seekers of truth, and you know the philosophers, the ancient philosophers were like that. They were seekers of excellence, and they were seekers of wisdom, which are so important in today's world, in the way we want to educate our future generations, in the way that we want actually to educate ourselves as citizens in today's world. So I would say my message would be that there cannot be responsible citizenry without truth seeking, and without truth seeking, we cannot have a future, a political future for our world.